A young orphan girl holding a baby was being sold, until a solitary rancher took them in. The wind carried dust across the empty street, like a whispered warning. It sifted through cracked saloon shutters and swirled beneath the chapel's warped door, where sunlight no longer reached. The town of Mercy Ridge sat still that morning, like it was holding its breath. Even the dogs under the porch steps didn't stir. Clara stood barefoot on the makeshift platform of old barnwood planks. A baby wrapped her chest in a frayed quilt that still held the scent of milk and ashes. Her dress, blue once, now faded to storm gray, hung loose on her frame, more suited to a ghost than a girl. The child in her arms stirred, then whimpered. Clara bent her chin, murmuring nothing sounds to soothe him, her mouth dry. There were 10, maybe 12 men gathered in front of her, most with hats drawn low and collars sweat-stained. Some leaned on canes, others on their pride. No one stood close, as if the sorrow might stick. She was 17, thin as fence wire, with knuckles bruised from too many days chopping wood and skin that never fully healed from the sun. She didn't look at the men. She'd learned long ago not to meet the eyes of those who meant to own things. The auctioneer was a bloated man named Dillard, with a sunburnt nose and a voice that cracked on every second word. He stood beside Clara with a ledger in one hand and a rag in the other, mopping at his brow like the heat had done him some personal insult. He didn't look at Clara when he spoke, didn't speak to her, either, just to the crowd. Girl comes with a babe. No claim to land or trade. Healthy, far as I know. Quiet type. Clara swallowed. She wasn't quiet by nature. She just didn't trust her voice to be hers anymore. Dillard kept talking. Can sew, clean, cook. You ain't buying trouble. Just a girl and the burden she carries. The baby, sensing something, let out a tiny cry. Clara patted his back, but her hands trembled and he felt it. He always felt it. A man stepped forward. Amos Drury. Broad chest, wider mouth. He smelled like boiled grease and money that hadn't been worked for. He lifted his hat, just enough to flash a smile that felt like a trap. I'll give $30 a pair, he said. More and fair, seeing as the child slow her hands. No one else spoke. Clara's stomach nodded. She knew Amos. Not well, but enough. His wife had disappeared some winters back, and his last housemaid had taken a train east with bruises she tried to cover. His offer was not one of kindness. It was of use. Dillard scratched something in his ledger. 31s. Please, Clara said, the word barely making sound. Her eyes darted to the side, but there was no one there to hear it. 30 twice. The baby let out a sharp wail. Sold. Dillard's voice fell like a hammer. Clara took a step back. Amos moved forward, hand out. She turned away from him, clutching the baby closer. Now, Dillard muttered. Don't be difficult, girl. Man's paid fair and square. I ain't yours, Clara said, the words coming before she could bite them back. The crowd murmured, not out of outrage, more like irritation at the pause in motion. No one here wanted a scene, not unless it ended quickly. Amos grabbed her arm. Then a voice, low and steady, cut through the heat like a knife through wax. That'll be enough. The crowd turned. A man stepped from the shadow of the post office veranda. He was tall and sun-worn, dressed in plain leather and dust. His face was half beard, half shadow. His boots were scuffed and silent. No spurs, no badge, no fuss. Clara froze. She had never seen him before. Amos dropped her arm and took a step back, more annoyed than afraid. This don't concern you, Creed. Creed. The name moved like wind through wheat. She'd heard it once. Silas Creed, the rancher out past the cottonwoods. Some said he didn't speak for whole months. Others said he'd buried a wife, so sweet even the coyotes had howled for her. It concerns me, the man said, voice grave deep, because I'll take them. Amos scoffed. You gonna outbid me, is that it? Creed didn't answer. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Quietly, he handed it to Dillard. The auctioneer's eyes flicked down and his face blanched a shade lighter. Deed to 100 acres, Dillard muttered. North pasture, clean water for head of horse. Now 5, Creed added. Dillard looked at Amos, then at Clara. It's as if the girl says so. The baby cried again. Clara swayed, cradling him. The voices around her blurred, but Creed stood solid. She looked at him, not because she trusted him, but because she had no reason not to. His eyes were steady, not warm, not cold, just waiting. He didn't say, "Come with me." He said, "If you'll come." It wasn't a command. It wasn't pity. It was a door left open. Clara looked at Amos, at Dillard, at the eyes of a town, all dull and glazed like old milk glass. Then she turned and stepped off the platform, feet hitting dirt. The baby settled as soon as she stood beside the quiet man. Creed nodded once, then turned and walked toward his horse. Clara followed. No one stopped her. No one clapped, either. They rode out slow, not looking back. The trail stretched wide ahead, golden with the late morning sun. The baby dozed against her chest, and her eyes kept straying to man whose name the wind carried like a half-forgotten prayer. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't say. But the farther they rode, the more the dust began to smell like growing things. The ride was long and wordless, though not heavy with silence. The road curved gently through golden plains, past thickets of cottonwood and low, whispering pines. The sun slanted westward, painting the dust with firelight. Clara held the baby tight as the mare beneath them swayed in rhythm with the land. She sat behind a man called Silas Creed, her arms anchored around the child, her breath brushing against the worn collar of his coat. His back was broad, his movements careful. He didn't glance over his shoulder. He didn't speak. Clara didn't mind the quiet. It wasn't cruel. It was the kind of quiet that left space for breathing. They reached his land just before dusk. The house came into view as a shape first, low and long like it had settled into the earth rather than been built upon it. The chimney puffed smoke, not much, just enough to say the hearth was waiting. Fenced pasture stretched behind it, a patchwork of brown grass and surviving green. Chickens scratched in the yard, half wild and free. A black dog lifted its head from the porch and gave a slow, disinterested wag. Silas dismounted without fuss, then turned to help Clara down. His hand came to her waist, not pressing, just steadying. She clutched the baby with one arm and let him guide her with the other. When her feet hit ground, she wobbled a little. He held her until she didn't. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. Instead, he led her inside, opening the door like he'd done 1,000 times, and maybe he had, always for himself. The cabin smelled faintly of pine smoke and something freshly baked. Cornbread, maybe. There were shelves lined with books, dusty but upright. A rocking chair faced the hearth, worn soft at the arms. The windows were small but clean. Light spilled across the wooden floor like honey. "You can take the room with the east window," he said, voice low as riverstone. "Water's on the stove." She nodded, shifting the baby against her shoulder. He pointed to a closed door off the main room. "Crib's in there. It's old. Might creak." Clara hesitated. "You had children?" His pause was the length of a heartbeat. "No." She didn't press. She moved toward the room. The floor creaked beneath her steps, not in complaint, just memory. She opened the door to find a narrow bed, a braided rug, and a cradle carved from oak. Someone had laid a patchwork quilt inside it, frayed at the edges but clean. There was a single chair in the corner, its seat bowed by time. She stood there a while, staring. The baby stirred. She laid him in the cradle, brushing a kiss to his cheek before stepping back. He didn't cry, just blinked up at the ceiling, calm as if he knew the worst had passed. Back in the kitchen, she found a plate on the table. 2 slices of cornbread, a boiled egg, and a tin cup of milk. A folded napkin beside it, striped with blue. Silas sat on the porch when she stepped out, his hat low and a knife in one hand, whittling a sliver of wood. The dog lay at his feet. Evening hummed in the distance, crickets, a mourning dove, the sigh of distant wind. She sat on the porch rail, quiet beside him. The knife moved in steady strokes. He carved a shape she couldn't name. "Your land?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Always yours." "My father's before. He's gone now." She studied the yard, the barn, the stillness. It's peaceful. He gave the ghost of a smile. It tries to be. The knife slowed. He looked over, eyes the color of creek stone. You got a name? Clara, she said, holding the rail like it might carry her weight. He nodded again. And the child? Luke, she said. He's not mine. He's my sister's. Was... He didn't ask what happened to the sister. Didn't need to. She stared into the dusk, and when she spoke again, her voice was steadier. My folks died in a fire. We were taken in by my mother's brother. He passed, too, a few months back. His wife said she couldn't feed us both. Silas didn't move. She tried to send Luke to the mission home in Red Hollow. Clara went on. Said he wouldn't remember me anyhow. Said I'd be better off without him. And you? I wouldn't leave him. She said it simply, like saying water was wet. The dog groaned, shifting against Silas's boot. He reached down and scratched behind its ear without looking. Clara glanced over at him, the angle of his jaw lit by the last light. You always as quiet? She asked. He looked sideways, a glint of something near amusement in his eye. Only when I got nothing worth saying. She allowed herself a breath that was almost a laugh. The sky bruised purple as night took the hills. One by one, stars blinked awake. The dog rose and patted inside. Silas stood. If you need more blankets, there's a trunk under the bed. Clara nodded. Thank you. He started to go in, but stopped. You don't owe me anything, Clara. She met his eyes. I know. He tipped his head, then disappeared inside. That night, Clara lay awake long after the baby had fallen asleep. The sheets smelled of cedar. A breeze crept through the cracked window, and somewhere out in the dark, an owl called. Her body was tired, but her thoughts walked in circles. This was not a place she had chosen, not a man she had known. But there was something about the way he spoke, when he did, and the way he didn't stare at her like she was ruined or delicate or something to be claimed. She didn't feel safe yet. Not fully. But she didn't feel afraid. That was new. She rose once to check the cradle. Luke slept with one fist beside his cheek, his mouth parted in that small, sweet way babies have when they dream. She ran a hand down his back, then returned to bed. Outside, Silas Creed sat again on the porch, chair creaking under his weight. He didn't light a lantern, didn't carve, just sat, staring into the wide night, where wind moved like an old song and memory stayed quiet under the stars. He didn't know what Clara carried in her silences, but he recognized the shape of sorrow when he saw it, and he had never once turned his back on something still trying to grow. Morning came slow and quiet. The sun rose pale through the eastern window, brushing gold across the walls. Clara stirred before the baby, her body aching in places she'd long stopped naming. Luke still slept in the cradle, small and warm, his breath soft as cotton. She watched him a moment, memorizing the way his hand twitched in sleep before slipping from the bed. The kitchen was empty, but for a note pinned to the table with a butter knife. Back by noon. Feed the hens, if you like. No signature, just the way he spoke, blunt, spare, but leaving room for choice. She found a basket near the door and stepped outside. Morning air was sharp against her skin, tinged with pine and last night's smoke. The chickens scattered at her approach, their clucks sounding like old women in gossip. She laughed under her breath and tossed feed with an awkward rhythm. It was the first time in weeks her hands had moved without shaking. Afterward, she wandered the yard. The garden behind the house had gone wild. Beans curled over sagging posts, tomatoes heavy on their vines, some already split from the sun. She crouched, touched the earth, and felt how loose and giving it was. Someone had tended this with care once, though not recently. When Silas returned just before noon, she was kneeling in the soil, clearing weeds with her bare hands. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her from a gate, his brow shadowed beneath his hat. Then he knelt beside her, handed her a worn pair of gloves, and started pulling weeds with her. They worked until the sun pressed hot on their necks. When it got too much, he fetched water, and they drank in silence, sweat painting lines in the dirt on their forearms. "Why'd you stop tending it?" she asked finally, wiping her face. He didn't answer at once. His eyes stayed on the dirt, the way a child watches something buried. "Didn't see the point," he said at last. "But you planted it," she said. He nodded. She didn't ask what had changed. Some silences held grief too heavy to stir. That night, after she'd bathed Luke and rocked him asleep, she stepped outside and found Silas sanding a plank by lamplight. He didn't look up when she approached. "What are you making?" "Cradle." She blinked. "But there's already one. This one's quieter. The old one creaks too much." She looked at the plank, at the tools laid out in neat rows. "You built all this?" she asked. "Most of it." "It's solid." He glanced over. "You don't miss a thing, do you?" She gave a small shrug. "When you've got nothing, you start noticing everything." He didn't smile, but something about his face eased. He offered her the sandpaper. "Go ahead," he said. "Always better with two hands." She took it. The wood was rough at first, but it softened with effort, and the rhythm settled into something quiet and companionable. They worked side by side until the moon climbed high. She didn't ask why he cared to build something better for a child not his own. She didn't need to. Sometimes people showed you what they meant instead of saying it. Days began to fall into rhythm. Clara woke before dawn to tend the baby, then gathered eggs or helped in the garden. Silas worked the fence lines, checked on the cattle, hauled lumber when needed. When Luke fussed, Silas didn't flinch from him. He'd take the baby if Clara needed both hands, cradling him in the crook of one arm like he was made for it. Luke seemed to know it, too, always settling quicker in Silas's arms than anywhere else. Once, while boiling laundry behind the house, Clara turned and saw Silas holding Luke up to the sky, letting the breeze tug at the child's blanket. He wasn't smiling, but his face held something softer than she'd seen before, something tender, almost unguarded. It passed quickly, like a shadow crossing a wall, but it stayed with her the rest of the day. It was Mabel at the dry goods store who first made mention of it. "You got a light in your face these days," she said to Clara, sliding a jar of molasses across the counter. "Wasn't there before." Clara didn't know what to say. She hadn't noticed. But later, when she caught her reflection in the window glass, hair loose, cheeks touched pink from sun, she wondered if it was true. One afternoon, as fall began its slow crawl across the trees, Clara stood on the porch and watched Silas hammer the new gate into place. Luke lay sleeping in the sling across her chest, his small mouth open in a sigh. She felt a pull in her chest that had nothing to do with milk or hunger. It was quieter, deeper, something that made her want to stay. But nothing good stays untouched. Amos Drury showed up 3 days later, riding in with a mouth full of false courtesy and eyes sharp with entitlement. He dismounted like he still owned the land he'd never worked, brushing invisible dust from his coat as he walked toward the porch. Silas stood in the yard, arms crossed, unmoving. Clara stayed on the porch, shifting Luke behind her instinctively. "Well," Amos drawled, "look at this little picture. Man gets a wife and a son, without lifting a finger." Silas said nothing. Amos flicked a look toward Clara. "You didn't say goodbye, girl." "Not polite." Clara didn't answer. Amos turned back to Silas. "She was promised to me. Ain't legal, but it was understood. Now you've gone and confused the matter." "She's not yours," Silas said. Amos sneered. "She was mine to take if I'd wanted her." Clara stepped forward then, voice cold. "You didn't want me. You wanted someone to own." Amos's jaw twitched. "I came to settle this fair." "Then turn around," Silas said. Amos's smile curdled. "You think you can just take what you want because you've got land and quiet manners?" "No," Silas said. "I didn't take her. She came." Amos looked like he might spit. Instead, he turned, mounted, and rode off with dust curling behind him like smoke. Clara watched him disappear, heart thudding, hands shaking. Silas remained still until the sound of hoofbeats faded. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind howled against the windows, and something inside her trembled. She stepped outside to find Silas on the porch, staring into the dark. He looked up as she approached, but didn't speak. She sat beside him. The baby slept inside, wrapped warm. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "Why take me that day?" He looked out at the pasture, then down at his hands. "Because you look like someone who'd never been chosen." She swallowed hard. "I don't expect you to stay," he said. "Don't expect anything." She turned toward him. "But you built a cradle." His voice was quiet. "Didn't say I wasn't hoping." The wind eased just a little. Stars scattered like salt across the sky. Clara reached for his hand. He let her, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them needed to speak. The hills were just beginning to blush with spring when Amos Drury returned. Clara noticed a dust plume first, rising far off down the road, like a finger pointing toward them. She was hanging linens on the line, Luke in the sling across her back, when the dog gave a low growl and took off toward the gate. By the time she wiped her hands and squinted into the sun, the rider had already crossed the creek. She didn't run. She didn't call for Silas either. She turned and walked toward the house, calm as she could make herself, her heart a steady drum beneath her ribs. Inside, she laid Luke in his cradle, kissed his brow, and pulled the shawl from the peg by the door. Her fingers didn't shake. Not yet. Silas was already out front when she stepped onto the porch. He stood with his hands at his sides, spine straight, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. The dog paced behind him in slow arcs, ears flat. Amos rode up with the same self-importance he wore like a second skin. His coat was cleaner than before, his mustache trimmed, as if he'd polished himself for this moment. "Well, now," he said, dismounting with a grunt. "Didn't expect a warm welcome, but I figured someone might at least offer a glass of water." Silas didn't blink. "You've come a long way to waste your breath." Amos laughed, but it held no warmth. "I've come to collect what's mine." Clara stepped down from the porch, her feet bare, her shadow long on the dirt. She didn't look at Amos until she was standing between the two men. "I was never yours." Amos tilted his head. "You were in my charge. Girl like you doesn't wander off without leaving questions. I've got folks asking what kind of man lets a good woman walk away with a stranger. I wasn't yours to let go. And I wasn't walking away, I was running." He flicked his gaze towards Silas, lips curling. "And what about him? He fix you? Feed you? Fill your head with dreams?" Clara's voice didn't waver. "He let me breathe." Amos stepped closer, boots grinding gravel. "You think this'll last? Out here, playing house with broken man and a borrowed child." Silas's voice came quiet and slow. "You need to leave." "I will," Amos said, "when I'm good and ready." His hand drifted near his belt, not to draw, but to suggest. The moment thickened. The sun bore down. The dog stopped pacing. Clara lifted her chin. "You came here thinking you could rattle something loose. But I'm not that girl anymore. You're still just a mouth to feed." "No," she said. "I'm the reason this house is lighted again. I'm the reason that man gets up before dawn to check the garden we planted together. I'm the reason a baby laughs in this yard instead of crying for a mother who's gone. I've earned every inch of this place. And if you can't see that, it's because you never looked at anything you didn't own." Amos's face twisted. "You'll regret this." "No," she said softly. "I regret not leaving sooner." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, final. Amos lingered a second too long, then spat in the dirt and turned back to his horse. He mounted with grunt, tossed a last glare towards Silas, then rode off down the road, his shape shrinking in the light. Clara didn't speak. Neither did Silas. But when he reached for her hand, she took it. His palm was warm and calloused, and it trembled just enough for her to feel it. That night, she sat beside him on the porch, Luke sleeping against her chest. The stars hung low. The wind stirred the trees with the hush of old hymns. Silas said nothing for a long while. "I used to be afraid," he murmured, "of letting someone stay. Thought if I did, they'd just leave again." She looked at him, the scar on his chin, the quiet in his eyes. "I'm still here." He nodded once. "I know." Spring bloomed around him in small ways. Daffodils nudging up by the fence post, bees drunk on the apple blossoms, birds calling from the roof in pairs. Clara found herself humming when she swept the porch, singing to Luke when she fed the chickens. The cradle Silas built no longer creaked, and Luke began to sleep through the night. One morning, Clara found a dress folded neatly at the foot of her bed. Pale green cotton, simple but fine, with stitching along the hem that mirrored the pattern on Silas's Sunday shirt. She held it to her chest and smiled without meaning to. She wore the first Sunday in May. They rode to town together, the three of them in one wagon. Clara in the green dress, Luke on her lap, Silas beside her with his hand resting lightly over hers. Folks stared. Some whispered, but none dared speak what they couldn't say aloud. At the church door, Mabel met them with a crooked grin. "Well," she said, adjusting her bonnet, "looks like the wildflower found good soil after all." Clara flushed. Silas only nodded. Inside, they sat near the back, where the windows lent the breeze. The sermon was about mercy, but Clara barely heard it. Her eyes kept drifting to Luke, who slept against her shoulder, and to Silas, who sat with his arms resting on his knees, head bowed in thought. Afterward, as they stepped into the sun, a boy no older than 10 ran up and tugged Clara's sleeve. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "is that your baby?" She looked down at Luke, then back at the boy. "He is." The boy smiled. "He's lucky." She smiled too. "So am I." They rode home slow, the road unwinding before them like ribbon. Silas took the long way, through the meadow that caught the sunset in gold. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and he didn't move. Just let her rest there like she belonged. And when they reached the porch, when the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in fire, Clara looked out over the land and felt the smallest ache, like joy trying to make room inside a heart that hadn't dared hope. Silas stepped behind her, arms around her waist. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low against her ear, "about planting peach trees." She turned her head slightly. "Why peaches?" He kissed her temple. "Because they take time, and they bloom sweet after frost." She turned to face him fully, hands on his chest, heart steady. "Then let's plant them," she said. And they did. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss the next tale from the heart of the Wild West.